remember sitting in my 9th grade theater class reading a newspaper article about the new Phantom of the Opera sequel, truly excited to see the continuation of a musical with which I recently became obsessed with. I have since learned the error of my ways. To say the show had a troubled history is a terrible understatement. Though Lloyd Webber started the framework for the sequel in 1990, basing it off of Frederick Forsyth's book, The Phantom of Manhattan, which frankly is its own train wreck, work on the music for the show did not begin until 2007. It finally opened in London's West End in early 2010 to very poor reviews. It was so bad that the show closed for a few days for some reworking, including changing directors and recruiting Charles Hart, who worked on the original Phantom musical, to rewrite the rather clunky lyrics of Clint Slater. And believe me, the initial lyrics were fairly bad, only mostly sort of fitting the cadence of the music. Even still, the show closed in mid-2011 with negative public opinion and poor ticket sales. This seems to have mostly killed any hope to bring Love Never Dies to Broadway in New York, especially after it closed in Australia after a mere 7-month run, again because of lack of ticket sales, even at severely discounted prices. This is really a sign of the quality of the show itself. Even though the Australian production made massive improvements to the original London run, it still could not remedy the material it had to work with. And this will be the version that I review today. While I most certainly plan to give my thoughts on the soundtrack and the original production, this is the only officially filmed form of the musical, and much of my complaints about the soundtrack are non-existent in this more recent iteration. Plus, currently running productions take more from this version than the original London run of the show anyways. Rewatching it with a closer eye for this video and writing the script really made it clear to me how much I despise this show.
Well, that's interesting because I rather like it. I'm Van's friend Mask. I do the art and script supervision for her, and some of our conversations turn into points in her videos. We had a lot to say to each other while rewatching this show for notes, so I'm helping in the video proper this time.
Wait, you mean this is my first crossover? Am I a real reviewer now? Sweet!
Technically, your first crossover was the Degrassi movie, and before that I added a few things to the original Phantom review, but sure, this is your first crossover proper, or at least a more significant guest feature.
Alright, let's get started! Really, the opening text only establishes how long it's been since the events of the first musical. Any effort to reconcile the wonky dates of when things take place is a futile and more frustrating task than it's worth. On top of that, wibbly-wobbly dates are the least of the story's problems. It is starkly noticeable how the Phantom is relieved of any blame for what happened in Paris. Lest we forget, he killed multiple opera staff and audience members, kidnapped a person, and extorted money in the story which this is meant as a sequel to. Instead, it's made to seem that people only hold him responsible for these events, and that there's room to doubt his involvement. I would go with this if the previous show didn't explicitly display him doing all of these things. The opening song, Till I Hear You Sing, immediately shows how much Charles Hart's rewrites have benefited this version. There is far less repetition, and the words better paint Eric's distress than what is heard in the soundtrack recording. And while it can seem whiny, it makes sense that the Phantom still feels lost without his muse. He had to sacrifice his angel music for the sake of her own happiness. And though it was the right choice, he still is haunted by the memory of her and feels unable to compose music unless hers is the voice to give it life. I guess he feels so much for her that he took the time to paint a rather excellent portrait of Christine, which is odd because I thought he was just an architect, designer, composer, and magician. Now I'm supposed to believe that he— wait, did that picture just move? Holy hell! I never noticed that before! Wow, this is really cool. The camera focusing on the Phantom really doesn't do this feature justice. Unless you're looking for it, Christine's movements are very easy to miss, and because we lose so much, it's difficult to tell why this was included. The next scene establishes the setting of a turn-of-the-century Coney Island, and this is where the magnificence of the costumes and sets is first noticeable. Not only does it look like someone on staff did a ton of research on early 20th century dress, and the costumes look very much of a different time and sense of style, but even the attractions harken back to a time before mass media and a common perception of what certain mythical creatures look like. The creativity on display is really breathtaking. You'd never see these merry-go-round monster designs today. I find myself even appreciating the outfits worn during Meg's vaudeville number.
Yeah, creativity. I agree about the merry-go-round creatures, but some parts here are just so blatantly juvenile. The show is called Phantasma, and it's run by a Mr. Y.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. For me, it pales compared to my other complaints, but it's still very silly, and you only notice what they were going for if you see the name written down.
The name Mr. Y to mean mystery as a cliche should set off recognition as instant as a bell sound.
While the original production's version leaned more on a modern perception of what a burlesque show looks like, this seems more of the time in which it takes place. Not truly showing skin, but clearly displaying each girl's legs and overall figure. I understand that this opening is similar to the originals, where we are thrust into the world of the show without immediate context, and it's difficult for me to discern if this is too indulgent here. Both of these sequences take up quite a bit of time, sort of stopping the story entirely to show off cool outfits and admittedly catchy songs, but honestly, I don't mind. I truly enjoy the spectacle on display while I'm given a taste of the setting for the story to come. Oh, hi Seinfeld. I didn't realize it until this production, but I love rotating stages. On one hand, it's fun to see the set turn away from the audience and turn into a completely different place. On the other, it must make scene changes so much easier because you can prep the next scene out of view without stopping the show. What I don't love is the overwhelming victim blaming from Madame Giry. She was there and saw the things the Phantom did to Christine and everyone else in Paris. Hell, Giry even admitted to fearing the man's wrath. Yet now Christine abandoned him. She chose Raoul based solely over him not being terribly deformed. Did we experience the same story? Being an architect, designer, composer, and magician does not excuse the horrible things that Eric did. Yet we're supposed to believe Giry when she says that Christine made a terrible mistake in choosing Raoul, the guy who didn't kidnap and abuse her?
This strikes me as cynically realistic, if not convincingly explained by the text. The vast majority of the human experience is your mind working like a narrator to explain why you're doing what you're doing. It's called the Ben Franklin effect. You try to justify the present state by coming up with reasons rather than starting from a line of reasoning that leads to action. If you asked her right at the beginning of her time on Coney Island, she probably would have said something very different about her situation, and Christine's, but after supporting the Phantom for 10 years, she sees things differently. It's the same mechanism behind Stockholm Syndrome.
If this is what they intended, then I think they should have at least noted this change in perspective because, to the audience, we can only see this as her ongoing thought on the situation.
If anything, I think it's meant to be implied by the passage of time, but that's a big ask of an audience's ability to fill things in.
Less that's a big ask, but more that there's no groundwork laid, and so we're left to guess, not analyze.
Hurry up, people! You have 4 more shows to do. No time to dawdle.
And again, what's with her accent? All of the main characters come from France, yet again, she's the only one with the regional accent. Everyone else has either an English or American way of speaking. Madame Giry is really in a world of her own, isn't she? Of all the characters in the show, even Christine herself, I empathize most with Meg. Oh, poor Meg. She's working so hard to make the Phantom happy and show that Christine isn't the only singer to perform his work. But for 10 years, he has ignored Meg and her mother, and she's had to listen to Madame Giry rant about Christine and how Eric only thinks of her. It's clear she longs for the past, when she and Christine were simple chorus girls in the opera, not on opposite sides of the Atlantic. We also get hints of how much not only their situations, but Meg herself has changed. They've traveled long and traveled far. Regardless of what her mother says, Meg can't hate Christine. While we do see her despise the Phantom's obsession with her and the effect Christine's presence has on her goals, Meg doesn't blame Christine herself. It's the situation and others involved that are to be resented. Though Madame Giry is troubled by Christine coming to America, Meg can't wait to be reunited with her best friend.
What's she doing? Waiting for the conductor?
Hey, Christine, where are you? Yodeling?
Is this what the world thinks of Americans? Loud and annoying? I suppose that may be fair. Especially those of us who would stake out a boat to fawn over simply famous and powerful people.
That's the darndest thing I've ever seen.
Oh, hi Yogi Bear.
Her name is Madame de Chauny.
stand aside. You insolent jackals, how dare you!
So, what's Rawl's deal? Why is he suddenly so belligerent and incapable of putting on a public face? Sure, people can change over 10 years, but why did he become an abusive pain? No reason is ever given, and we're supposed to accept that he's stupid enough to gamble away his fortune? This stinks very much of what's called Ron the Death Eater, where a previously good guy character is made villainous so that a more desired ship can be obtained. I hate Ron the Death Eater, and I hate what they've done to poor Rawl.
I don't. I've always despised Raoul, basically from the first scene I ever saw of his, so it's pleasing to see my dislike of him validated by the show proper. But even beyond that, I far prefer this version of him to the original. The old Raoul was mortally bland, a drunkard turned to gambling that lost his fortune and is reduced to a beggar noble, while contemptible, is at least interesting. Raoul has a pretty huge hate-dom, so giving viewers something to fix that feeling onto is playing into something that they already want him to be. Can you count it as character assassination if he had no character to begin with?
But playing into what the audience wants rather negates the story we're already familiar with. It's as though you're saying, tell me what you want and I'll write it for you. He can't catch a break. Last time his only character trait was being the typical hero. Now he's an abusive drunk. You know, it sounds like the original Raoul was such the obvious pick over the Phantom that they had to turn him into someone else to get us to cheer for Christine and Eric's reunion. Sure, he gets some pleasant moments of sobriety where he can recognize the man that he is and is able to put others before his demons, but that doesn't make this change any less of a hard pill to swallow. And while the point of making Raoul an ass was to make him seem worse than the Phantom, frankly he's still just slightly better if not as bad. Though he regularly ignores his wife and child and emotionally, possibly even physically abuses them, these are crimes the Phantom has also committed. Plus, Raoul hasn't killed or kidnapped, but Eric has, though the show really wants you to forget that. Jeez, Christine is seriously too good for both men.
Mysteries and melodies play inside my mind.
I don't care for Gustav's little interlude before they head to the hotel. I guess it's supposed to suggest that his thoughts are abnormal and lay the groundwork for the Phantom to relate to him later on, but all it accomplishes is the character telling the audience, look, I'm special. I also despise Look With Your Heart. Yes, it well reflects how years of internalized abuse has affected Christine, but the song is presented as a wise truth. Ignore any red flags you may see if you care in the slightest bit for a person. It glorifies being the loving abuse victim and staying with someone who hurts you. Christine, you are the example of why not to follow your heart. Why are you suddenly giving in to this dangerous idea of love? Not only that, but you're teaching it to your son. Caring for someone is not justification to take whatever abuse they give.
I think it's worse than that. The suggestion that your mind will deceive you, but emotional reasoning will never lead you astray is philosophically offensive. That search your feelings, you know it to be true nonsense is a plague upon culture, classical and modern alike. Don't confuse action for motivation, nor motive for observation, nor observation for reasoning. Look with your eyes, feel with your heart, and make sense of it all with your mind.
Ugh. Beneath the Moonless Sky is such a waste of time. We didn't need an entire ballad of how Christine and Eric romped around a barn between musicals. All they had to establish is that they had sex, Christine wanted to choose the Phantom actually, and Eric was the one to abandon their future together. The latter point being really silly and a huge contrivance. The characters mentioned that they know why Eric had to do this, but we have no clue why. She chose him! She had sex with him! What's to be ashamed of? If anything, he would feel vilified in all that he did in the past and therefore negating his whole character arc. Wow, this story's existence really hurts the original.
I disagree with his logic here, but I think he feels like he defiled his muse. While he's proud of his abilities, he loathes his physicality. Maybe he thinks he tainted her. Guilt is a powerful motivator and frequently overcomes otherwise reasonable people. And an artist driven by passion to the extent that Eric is, I think he's an easy mark for it, particularly after having just gotten what he so desperately wanted, leaving him in a vulnerable state.
Even still, before they parted in the last musical, she pointed out that his face was no longer an issue for her. It's the man behind it. But clearly that doesn't even matter since she sought him out afterwards. The song especially ruins the ballad that comes directly after, where the characters reflect on their choices and where they are in life now. It's made less powerful, and the audience starts to feel power ballad fatigue from the story being stalled for so long.
Understand.
And take what little we deserve? Again, abuse victim thinking being glorified for the sake of tragedy.
Post hoc justification is a bit of a theme in this show, isn't it? First with Madame Giry, then the fandom hating Raoul, and now both the Phantom and Christine. It seems like they're taking different angles on it, like any half-built theme exploration ought.
Now, if only they would have made use of this almost exploration, do anything with it other than, but we don't care about that. Jeez, the show is bad fanfiction made canon. Hell, it's a mockery to the art of fanfics. This was clearly written by people who think Christine should have chosen the man who emotionally abused her simply because he is a tragic figure.
Of course, the emotionally minded love to glorify the romantic ideal of someone given to their passions and heart as their primary motivator, where a beautiful creative has deep feelings that carries them away. That's romantic in a literary sense, the reaction to the Enlightenment, not Mata Spritzy. It also manifests in the manic pixie dream girl.
Or the starving artist.
Being a tragic figure is its own virtue in that mindset, and it's easy to accord yourself with that worldview if you're a career artist.
Which reminds me, I've seen the two stories compared to Andrew Lloyd Webber's own life. Like Eric, he sought to boost his love's career through his artistry, but ultimately lost her in the end. And since their divorce, his works have been mostly of middling to very poor quality, perhaps due to the loss of his muse. And now Love Never Dies is a fantasy of rekindling feelings of the past and his Christine realizing what a folly it was to ever abandon him. Of course, this is speculation, but artists often draw from their own life for inspiration. Even if that were true, it does not save this musical. Not only do I take issue with how the show tries to punish Christine for fleeing a dangerous person, but also that the Phantom gets a pass for objectifying the person he supposedly loves. He immediately reduces their dramatic reunion to his favorite instrument once more being in his possession. Her simply being there in his sight again isn't what he's excited for. It's that Christine's voice is now at his disposal. Glad to see Christine herself has value to you, Eric. I have to agree with Lindsay Ellis here. This moment and the whole show negates the character development that the Phantom had in the original. His whole arc last time was learning that loving someone means recognizing their autonomy, even if it means letting them leave you. Love is about valuing another person's well-being over your wants sometimes. But now he seemed to have learned nothing. Eric's back to manipulating Christine and using her as a mean to a selfish end. And he doesn't relearn this lesson. He only tries to set Christine free again later because he's ashamed that his son doesn't love his hideous face. Oh yeah, spoilers.
I owe you nothing.
She's right! Given everything he's done, Christine owes him nothing. Hell, it's the Phantom who owes her 10 years of missed child support payments. Did I mention spoilers? I love you so much that I'll threaten your child's well-being to get you to do what I want. Yes, this is very Phantom-y, but this is not a person who loves Christine. Truly loving someone means you care about their well-being and wanting to see them rarely in pain.
The monster that you saw me for is the monster I became.
A bit of Phantom-y goodness I do appreciate is the symmetry of Eric entering Christine's life again through the mirror, and then leaving through it. It's a small reference to the original, but it's still really cool. Certainly better than most of the song sampling of the first musical throughout this one. Oh, good! Mega's finally back. I love how she's focusing so much on getting the new routine down, even though it represents going to darker depths to please the Phantom. But more on that later. It's time for dear old friends to reunite. This is likely my favorite song of the show. It's catchy, fun to sing, and it doesn't interrupt the story. In fact, the story progresses during it. Initially, everyone, except Giry, is excited to see each other after 10 long years, but slowly, each starts to realize that perhaps their reunion may be for the worse. Even the rhyme scheme and syllable structure is off-kilter, and the rhythm breaks down while Raoul and Giry try to discern the strange events that have led them to this point. I still take issue with even this part though. For one, why have plans changed? Christine came to America to sing for Hammerstein, which won't occur for another 2 weeks. Why did she drop that gig to sing for the Phantom exclusively? She could have done both. Save for the time between learning of Christine's departure from France and her getting off the boat, the story takes place over the course of a few days. Plenty of time to practice for both performances, and thus earning twice the amount of money. Also, unless she knew, Giry, that Christine hate boner has lasted far too long and you should see a doctor. Priapism is serious business. Why does Raul get mad at Christine after it's suggested that she knew it was Eric who contracted her? It's unreasonable for him to think that she actually has romantic feelings for the man. Last time he saw the Phantom, Christine was actively trying to escape his love. Does he know of the romp 10 long years ago? Did he get a hold of the script? It is cool to notice throughout the entire scene that the crew has been setting up this blue orb that finally rises and signals the descent into the Phantom's abode. Quite ingenious.
One moment, little Vicomte, while I prepare our adventure.
So, I know that this adventure never occurs, so perhaps the writers didn't have anything in mind for why the Phantom says this, but look man, by your own admission, he's just 10 years old. Pray tell, what sort of adventure did you have in mind? Unfortunately, not all the lyrics have been altered to perfection. Seems that the thesaurus was not on hand in the writing room, as the only positive descriptor anyone knows is beautiful. Gustave repeats it constantly, as does Christine. Sometimes I get the sense that the repetition is supposed to be a purposeful, artistic decision, but the rest of the time the word is used just because. The oversaturation disrupts any poetic intention. So I guess Gustave takes a piano-based paternity test that reveals Eric was a sperm donor? Never saw this method on Maury. Seriously, how are we supposed to believe that Christine and the Phantom know without a doubt that Gustave isn't Raul's son? Did she Cersei Lannister her husband? Does Raul think he remembers them conceiving the boy but was too drunk to remember that it never happened? Musical talent is not scarce in Christine's side of the family, and piano technique is not genetically inherited. Also from this, Eric assumes Gustave would share an interest in the grotesquely beautiful, again because such things are inherited apparently. Even still, I quite enjoy Beauty Underneath. Hell, it's even my ringtone, which has the unfortunate effect of me reaching for my phone every time the song starts. The strong guitar riff in the beginning is awesome, and it very too easily becomes an earworm. Not to mention, everything around the song is awe-inspiring. I love the trio's low dance as the stage transitions into Phantasma's attractions. Again, we see this foreign imagery for recognizable figures in mythology creating such a spectacle. It's also a nice moment for Gustave. Though we know Christine gives him all the love that she can, he still feels alone in his interest in the beauty underneath surface level repulsion. But now he's found someone who not only understands, but shares this unusual fascination. It's the same for the Phantom. Someone else appreciates his world. Though, I don't know why this leads him to reveal his face. Really, it hasn't worked out in the past.
Seeing past initial revulsion is the foundation of their entire bond at this point. If anyone is going to be able to overlook his deformity and actually be able to understand it's this one, his child, he dared to hope for acceptance one more time and it was immediately dashed.
I suppose. Ah, Meg, once more gracing us with your tragic presence. It's sad to see her attempt to comfort Eric, coming so close to touching him, but only to be disrupted by Christine. Sort of symbolic. Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if the Phantom rejected her empathy. She's not what he wants, and essentially exists in an entirely different world like Raul and her mother.
We'll come back to it later, but this moment right here is a tragedy of what could have been in my mind. I like to think that if she had been able to comfort Eric for even a moment, he would see her as actually being there for an instant, and maybe the events to come would have played out differently. Perhaps in a dream. A twist of the knife for me especially, since Meg has always been my favorite character.
But her time on stage doesn't last, and once more the narrative turns to victim-blaming Christine. Now it's the Phantom guilt-tripping her into singing his song by kind of, sort of insinuating that her initial rejection of his face led them to this point.
Do you think it's wrong even if it's sincere?
Yes!
Yeah, me too.
It makes sense that we don't get a good look at the deformity because it's really unnecessary. We know he's ugly, and frankly, his looks have little to do with the story this time around. Having a hideous face matters as much as Gustave being a brunette. It's but a small feature with little effect on the plot, except for one instance of scaring a 10-year-old. I understand Eric wanting to make sure that his son is well provided for, but what of the Giris? Do they get nothing for basically making his dream world a reality? Madame Giry isn't a villain for wanting her work to be recognized and rewarded, yet the show tries to paint her as such for this reason, not for blaming Christine for being a victim, so that she can be a red herring later on. By the way, I love that she was hiding on stage the whole time. Sure, there could have been a trapdoor that she entered before her cue, but it's so much cooler to imagine the player secretly waiting on stage for her part. Why Does She Love Me is another instance of sobriety for Raul as he reflects on the monster he's become. And it doesn't bother me that this song doesn't lead to any redemption or character development. It's actually depressingly realistic. We've all known or will know someone who's aware of a flaw that they have and yet not work to rid themselves of it. It's an easy trap to fall into, and actually changing your habits is very difficult, as we see here. He knows the alcohol is a shadow hanging over what was to be a happily ever after, and yet in the same song, he orders another drink to wipe away the guilt he feels because of it. Even Meg can't convince Raul to change his ways as she tries to warn him of the Phantom's influence over Christine. While I truly enjoy Devil Take the Hindmost as a song, once again the objectification of Christine rears its grotesque smirk. The two men basically have a dick-wagging contest over who she belongs to, and we're just supposed to ignore that our leading lady has been reduced to a prize to be won?
To paraphrase some of the actually good work done by Anita Sarkeesian on the elements of objectification, in the game of the patriarchy, women aren't the opposing team, they're the ball.
Yup. That's honestly what this narrative has reduced her to. Really, Christine long ago chose Raul. Why are they acting like that decision is only now about to be made? Again, the sequel is negating its own prequel.
And itself from earlier. Remember, she did go to him, hence Gavroche.
Gustav.
Whatever.
It's really annoying how many nuggets of awesomeness are in this deplorable show. Like Raul tipping over the chair drunkenly and their handshake turning into more threats. So much thought was put into this production undeservedly.
Like dear old friends before it, this song flexes an incredible use of prosody, the beats of their parts in step with one another, then Raul changing meter from dactyls to iambic triplets, slipping out of phase before reconvening at the end of this section. It's to die for. I especially love this moment where Eric is leaning in and exerting his presence like I could crush you here and now, but I have chosen not to.
These moments almost make the show worth watching. Now, I know Bathing Beauty is not the epitome of composing brilliance and rather stands out in a Phantom of the Opera show, but I don't mind it. I'm not bothered by how long the sequence lasts. Yes, it's essentially tailor-made for me to appreciate the onstage costume changes and the admittedly catchy tune, but the song is also very symbolic of Meg's character as a whole. She started out as a prim and proper ballerina in the Paris Opera, but over the course of 10 years, she's lost everything she once was, giving herself more and more to make a thankless man's ambitions come to pass, which, as we learn, includes granting sexual favors to potential backers. Over the course of the song, her layers peeled down to almost nothing until she finally gives her last bit of public dignity, i.e. going nude on stage. On top of that, she's allowed her last place of refuge to be tainted. It was established that to Meg, the sea is a cleansing force, relieving her of the things she's done to get this far. And now, by becoming the Bathing Beauty, the symbol of salvation is being sacrificed for the sake of attempting to wrangle the eye of a blind man. She's not smiling through the number because she loves what she's doing. Meg is a performer. When you're on stage, you as a person is put to the side as you assume the role that you play. For this brief moment, Meg is the Bathing Beauty who likes her body to be oogled at by strangers. And it's very painful to see Meg learn that this final sacrifice won't even be recognized as the Phantom wasn't there to see it. Jiri doesn't know what her words are doing to Meg, which unfortunately is also very realistic. As she laments their lack of worth in the Phantom's eyes, her daughter takes these words to heart, and over 10 long years of being convinced that her efforts are fruitless, ultimately leads to the climax of the story.
There's a lot of abuse in this show.
I thought you had good taste.
Love nor like is blind. Don't look with your heart.
Hark! Is that a heartbeat I hear?
Only diamonds.
And welcome to the final act, where our protagonist becomes no more than a prize to be won by the men in her life, and ultimately has no agency in the matter. They try to paint her choice on whether to perform or not is a symbol of deciding which man to be with, but Christine doesn't know the stakes. All she has is two guys telling her to do one or the other simply because he wants her to. For Christine, choosing to sing is more of an act of self-indulgence, getting to do the thing that she loves, singing on stage. Hell, this is an act of defiance against her terrible husband. The whole show, she's been just going along with his whims, but now she's choosing her own way, which is to feel beautiful through performance, not to dissolve their marriage. And given how Raul tries to guilt trip her into doing his bidding by stating, "If you love me, you'll do as I say," No wonder Raul lost out on this bet, though it's clear that the show doesn't even know what the repercussions would be for Christine actually choosing Eric over Raul at this point. It's not so much that she feels she can't leave because she's been emotionally abused into thinking Raul is her only option, but because of the common perception of divorce at that time. It was still very looked down upon, and even if it did occur, you never want to be the woman in that scenario. Not only as a woman you couldn't file for divorce yourself without some extreme circumstances, but as a divorced woman, you'd be seen as damaged or used property. Her reputation would be shattered, and her financial future would be uncertain as any money she has would belong to Raul. Plus, Gustave would be branded a bastard once the truth got out why he isn't going to be the next Vicomte. And why is the Phantom watching Christine and Raul kiss? This is really unnecessary and proves he'll learn nothing about creeping on girls in their dressing room.
It probably isn't, but it's at least possible that this is a visual metaphor, since we see Raul in this position later at the turn when she reads his letter. It could mean that she has the other man in her mind, or it could be his longing for her as she pulls away towards the other. Either way, it's not particularly clear, so in the best possible case, you're meant to take it as literal the first time and then retroactively consider that it might not be when it's Raul's turn, which is an interesting idea, but not well executed if that's the case. I'm probably reaching here to make it better by analysis.
I can see that, and while normally a noble and healing effort, it's not really working here. It just seems like a needless flourish, like the painting from earlier. As though they said, we have the technology, let's do it! On top of all that, I find the use of Twisted Every Way to be an insult to the first show. They're seriously trying to make deciding between following the wishes of one abusive jerk over another abusive jerk seem just as difficult and high-staked as choosing between freedom or safety in a literal life and death scenario. Again, Christine doesn't know that her decision could mean the end of her marriage, so all she has to discern is if she values her nasty husband's wants over doing something for herself for once. Whereas in the first show, she was faced with either being bait for a dangerous man or resigning her coworkers and friends to facing the wrath of said man. They're really making a cold into a cancer here. But yeah, Christine chooses to sing.
This sequence struck me as Christine having a metatextual conversation with the men in her life based on who she turns to look at during which line. Looking at it with that in mind changes the meaning somewhat and provides interest that the song alone is lacking.
I like the staging a bit, her turning to Raul and silently remarking that her care for the Phantom hasn't died, but that doesn't mean that her love for her husband is non-existent, and then looking at the Phantom admitting that she still wishes things would have gone differently 10 years ago. The trouble is this happens twice. The same motions and same reactions until Raul finally leaves in defeat. I really can't blame them for choosing this blocking. What else can we have them do during this boring song? Whatever interest this interaction gives, I'm still just waiting for the song to end. Not only did they repeat this conversation twice, but it takes up so little of the number that I'm left yawning with boredom. The grand thought being pondered is completed in the first 30 seconds. Love hurts, but it remains no matter what, and is also kinda good. But it keeps going and going. The music isn't interesting either. Frankly, I expected more from an angel of music. I can't blame Christine for just standing there because in-universe she's just performing an aria. She's not acting in an opera, just singing a song to an audience she's not pretending isn't there. But this again doesn't make the piece any less boring, and the lack of composing and lyrical brilliance makes the scene suffer. Just wake me up when it's over. No, I don't take issue with the fact that Love Never Dies was recycled from a less successful version from an even less successful show. I do have a problem with the recycled song being so yawn-inducing. Not even Anna O'Byrne's lovely voice can save this piece. I can, however, empathize with Christine's feelings after the performance. While I struggle to believe that this song itself can cause such a response, I can understand when she expresses that performing again made her feel beautiful and alive. To hear an audience cheer for your artistry to do the thing you love, it's a powerful experience. Plus, living with Raul for 10 years and having to put herself aside to be a mother to Gustave, these feelings must be rare for Christine. Sucks that this moment is ruined by a kiss she would likely need to later look back on in shame since she's still married to another person. And then that person telling her by note that he's abandoned her and her child for seemingly no reason except that she didn't do as he wanted. This show either doesn't think about the implications here, or just seriously hates Christine as much as Madame Giry. The ending, I like a sliver of it. The rest sucks. Even though Meg dragged Gustav to the pier and threatened his life, it's clear she never meant to follow through on her threats. She only wanted Eric's attention, and since going naked in public couldn't do it, maybe threatening his son would.
It's loony, and the Phantom has killed people for far less, but I can see a line of reasoning here. It is a very Eric move, after all.
It doesn't make Gustav's inevitable trauma any better, but I understand it. It's terribly sad to see Meg come to this point. After trying to help the Phantom for years and never once being recognized for it, and hearing all about how nothing she does can compare to Christine, the one thing this man wants, she's come to the point of suicide. Meg hates what she's become, yet hoped being noticed would save her. But that never came. Her last wish is for Eric to finally see the culmination of years of suffering, partially because he couldn't be bothered to appreciate those around him. Even though I wouldn't want Meg to succeed, I can't see why the Phantom tries to talk her down. It's not at all in character for him to take kindly to someone getting in the way of his ambitions. The person he's supposed to be wouldn't immediately forgive someone enough to tell them not to kill themselves after watching them threaten his son's life. The character only does this because doing otherwise would upset societal standards of the audience.
This is reaching again, but maybe he sees her suddenly as a similarly tragic figure, realizing that her obsession with him bears similarity to his long-standing obsession with Christine.
Even still, I can't imagine Eric being careless enough to compare Meg to Christine negatively while trying to convince her that she is still beautiful after all she's done.
Agreed.
Meg never meant to shoot Christine. It was clearly an accident brought upon by poor trigger discipline while she and the Phantom wrestled over the firearm. Damn. I wouldn't be surprised if Meg offed herself after this tragedy. The one person she couldn't resent for her situation would now die at her hands.
It'd be a poetic end if she drowned herself in the ocean, I think. Her sanctifying anchor finally washing her trouble away, along with the rest of her.
Morbid much?
Much should only follow verbs, otherwise it breaks the grammar of the joke.
Spelling was never my best subject. Fun fact, Christine was supposed to bleed after that shot, but the blood pack did not burst during this performance. We even see Anna O'Byrne trying to manually make the pack work, but it was being too fussy. The rest is rather ambiguous. Christine did have a chance to tell Gustav of his true parentage, but no future plans are definite. The three are just left on stage mourning, though Gustav apparently is over his mom's death enough to not blame the Phantom and in fact embrace his hideous face. Or maybe that's just shock we're seeing. Gustav is not going to grow up happy, not that his childhood was splendid before now. He watched his mother be shot, found out the man he called father for years isn't his dad, and now has the guilt of missing his mom's final moments alive. Just a bucket full of psychosis there. It's not any better for Raul or Eric. Raul ran off on his wife with only an angsty note of explanation and now finds the woman he loved died in his absence. He's probably going to drink himself to death. Eric has his muse's blood on his hands and now has to raise a child he's only known for a few days. He also has no clue how to take care of another person, having not been properly parented himself and essentially living alone all of his life. On the bright side, I guess the three can be an early 1900s version of 2.5 Men? The ending is unnecessary and does little to resolve the story. Other than finishing out Meg's quest to be recognized by the Phantom, we're left with more questions than answers, and not in a good way. Where and how can these characters proceed? Will Gustav be allowed to still inherit the title of Vicomte? What will become of Phantasma and the Phantom? Christine dying only seemed to have happened because the creators had no idea how to wrap up the story, and so chose shock value over tying up loose plot threads. And no one learned anything or progressed as a character. Everyone remained essentially the same throughout, and no one had to face the consequences of their actions. Well, their own actions. I know I called Christine the protagonist earlier, but really that title belongs to Eric. He's the one whose actions affect the story and how it moves along. But again, he doesn't have to answer for those decisions or learn anything. He ends right where he started, mourning the loss of his love. The performers are all wonderful, and I find little to no fault with their work here. The sets and costumes are bursting with more creativity and passion than I see in many musicals. But none of these make this show good or even okay. I do have to admit, even though this is a filmed live stage production, it really doesn't feel like it except for the rare moments when we can see the audience. More so than the 25th anniversary show, this version's editing and camera work was so flawless it feels more like a traditional movie. The music itself is, while sometimes catchy, overall standard and doesn't stand out. It especially doesn't live up to the iconic score of its original, no matter how many times it tries to insert bits of the first show's music to heighten its own. And most damningly of all, the messages in the show are outright malicious. Love is used to mean abusing someone to get them to do your bidding, and staying with that abuser because they can sometimes be nice. Look past the plain and unavoidable ugliness in the person you love simply because you care about them. And that fact alone should make any suffering you face trivial compared to the repercussions of possibly leaving. I'm going to see the US tour's performance in Chicago this month, and while I've heard some story changes have been made and I hope for an improved narrative, my expectations are very low. It does say something that I was able to acquire 3 seats next to each other with a decent view of the stage rather easily on 2 weeks' notice. Overall, I cannot recommend this version of the show. Unless some serious changes are made to the harmful messages and nothing of an ending, this will always be a blight on the original Lloyd Webber musical. It negates everything previously established while strangling each of our favorite characters before our eyes. I can't believe they dared to call this a sequel. So why do you like the show?
Some of it is definitely technical. The use of meter in Dear Old Friends and Devil Take the Hindmost is excellent, and I'm quite fond of Beauty Underneath as well. Overall, though, I think this is a perfect storm of quirks of our different core values and what I'm willing to forgive. I have always hated Raoul in the original because he is entirely without traits besides an informed backstory. I quite like Meg based on aesthetic persona and other snippets of characterization which expand tragically here, and I've always preferred the Phantom himself because I'd rather someone be smart than good. Skill and intellect are virtues unto themselves in my eyes, and I've actually had friends that openly misliked me, but we still kept each other's company because we enjoyed each other's sharp perspective. Beyond that, I'm willing to put work into anything as I watch it, which often results in my reconstructive mindset filling in the gaps so that the story can function. If I didn't, I'd barely be able to enjoy anything at all, and in extreme cases I'll go so far as to negate the fiction entirely, which is how I can enjoy Twilight. This isn't nearly to that level, and if I have to resort to something like that, then I wouldn't consider what I'm watching to be anything other than bad. The structure of the narrative here makes it clear that you're supposed to sympathize with the Phantom because he's the de facto protagonist. His are the actions that move the story along, while Raoul is the antagonist because he opposes them. Eric wants Christine to choose him by implication from choosing herself, which is why he tempts her with her own desires. The music she values in herself is also the best part of him, which he helped shape in her, and they create together thereafter, hence the musical ability of their child. With the passage of time, he's come to regret balking over his own hang-ups when she chose him once before. Besides, you're one to talk. You like Evita.
Firstly, what you describe is a much better show than we are given, and though I'd love to headcanon it into reality, I cannot ignore these moral flaws that this musical wants us to just accept as okay. Secondly, Evita is not even close to the same.
That's what I mean about it being a perfect contrivance, though. This has the right combination of elements that I value, that when you add my willingness to forgive flaws, you get a fairly high score considering. You like Annie and Evita, and I like Love Never Dies and Princess and the Pea.
That's not even why I like Evita. I'll go into more in its own video at some other time, but that show knows Evita is not the saint that everyone thinks and playfully makes jabs at the character for it, which is much of the fun of the musical. Here the story hand-waves any fault of the Phantom to tempt us into thinking he's the good guy.
I'll grant that. The Phantom mythos at large has always existed in a fuzzy meta-narrative space for me. Some elements of the story I picked up via cultural osmosis, but seem to have no actual origin. A perfect example of this is the iconic moment in the Don Juan sequence when the Phantom is unmasked and it turns his hair shock white out of surprise and horror. I'm 1000% confident that that scene is a major visual touchstone for many adaptations of the Phantom, but I haven't the faintest where I got that idea since it seems to have materialized out of nowhere. On that note, a piece I'll always remember from this show is a possible alternate course of events where Meg was able to comfort the Phantom, which lays the groundwork for the pier scene when he really sees her and things go slightly different differently by just enough for things to end well. Eric doesn't embrace Meg, but out of regard for the desperate passion that mirrors his own, he acknowledges her, accepting but not returning her focus. This, what could have been, makes what actually happens all the bittersweeter. A twist in the myth becomes a twist of the knife. Anyway, I think part of your problem is you're trying to cram it into being a sequel to the Andrew Lloyd Webber show, when clearly to my eye, it's a sequel to an alternate past.
While this musical is explicitly meant to be a sequel to the Lloyd Webber version, I think you're right. Yeah, and I know the show that'd be the perfect prequel to this.